What's up, guys? We're going to do a little bit different video than we normally do. This is going to be a technical look at the passes that we did last week testing on the street. So we're going to be looking at data logs, we're going to be looking at the tune files and a bunch of different tables and strategies that we were trying to test out, see what happened good and what went terribly from these passes. All right, so right off the bat, I don't know a crazy amount about Chris's car. So instead of, it would have been nice to be able to go over both of these cars and both of their passes and tell you what was changing and everything. I know a little bit about his car, but realistically, just the short amount of time that we were even talking about it, what we should try and whatnot. I don't know what other tables Robert has in there. Robert Bateo is the one who actually tunes that car. And so I didn't really want to step on toes or anything and really try suggesting, trying too many different things because I didn't know what strategy they normally use before. So I think they've since taken a look at it and have some new things that they're going to give a try. But yeah, we probably just we'll just stick to the three passes that we did in Liam. All right, so this first pass, like it says in the video, it was a relatively low RPM launch. Low boost launch, moderate three-step table, 19 psi peak with a slow ramp, and we were testing out the Burnout Limiter timing table. We'll take a look at each of those things specifically. So what does low RPM launch mean? Well, it's going to be different for every car. Depending on whether you're launching with, Turbo 400, or depending if you have a really tall or short rear gear, all of these things are going to be drastically different. So don't think that you can, take a car and say, well, he launches with this, so that should work for me. There's always variables. So, I'm not trying to give you guys settings that will work on your car. This is more hopefully to try to show you how I figure out what works with mine, so that then you can kind of apply a similar strategy to get yours working better as well. And maybe it's what we didn't do here that gives you an idea. So if we forgot to do something, or we did something that really didn't work out as we should, maybe that gives you an idea that you can try on yours that would be better. But so low RPM launch, low boost launch, moderate three-step table, 19 psi, burnout rev limiter. Let's watch the pass, and then we'll go back through the log file and the tune file itself to show you what each of those are. So. All right, so actually, we'll take this in pieces. Right off the bat, this was a success for the Burnout Rev Limiter. It's the first time that I actually used it, and it wasn't in the wet like the last video that we did where I was trying to use it. This was a full normal test. That's the way I normally do my burnout. The Burnout Rev Limiter is set much lower than the main Rev Limiter, and we have a bunch of timing taken out. I'll show you that table here in a second, but it enabled me to not really have to pedal it all that much. I was a little bit short of being floored on that one, but it made it so much easier to hold that steady RPM because it was taking the power away once it got close to that RPM limiter. So it wasn't sitting there just bouncing off of the limiter. It was just kind of holding that steady RPM, nice and easy. So, all right, we'll do the rest. Handsome devil right there. Okay, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to tell in all of these. The truck is not that quick. It is not going an eighth mile in these passes. I'm letting out early because the majority of the work is in the first couple of seconds for this. I'm not too concerned with this test session how much power I can put up top. I can put almost all of it. I mean, we'll see a little bit later on that it's making more than I'm used to having. So I do have to work on that a little bit up top, but it just wasn't the concern for now. The biggest concern was not being able to get the hell out of the hole like the last race that we did. So in this one, I guess we'll take first what the results of the pass was, and that's basically it was really soft out of the hole. It wasn't terribly slow. I mean, it still moved. It sounds slow when you're trying to be, pretty controlled out the gate. It's got a relatively tall gear, or not crazy tall, but it's a 342 rear gear in it, and then a standard 248, 148, 1 in the transmission. It's a 28-inch tire, so that gives you an idea of the gearing. First gear with this converter is a lot different than it was with the previous converter. The previous converter, it slipped a hell of a lot more. We didn't realize that it was slipping, but that made RPM jump up really high, and it felt like it had shorter gears, but really it was just slipping away the majority of it. So we based a lot of tables on that, and since this one grabs so much more, the RPM goes up a lot more linear than it used to. Okay, so actually right before we take a look at the log, because I don't have a log of the burnout, I kind of wish I downloaded those to show this portion of it, but I did not. So the soft limiter that we did, I can't remember if I actually showed this or not. So you have the overall main rev limiter, and right now we have that set to 7,000. We wanted to give ourselves a little bit more RPM because the previous converter kind of forced us to. This new converter, don't really have to do that. We're going through, at like 6,300 or something like that. So no big deal at all there. But when we did this, like if we want to spin it high, whether we need the gear up top or we want to spin out first gear or second gear that high, we can. And the reason why we put in the burnout limiter was so that we didn't bang on that during the burnout. So the other rev limiter is this one. This is for launch control. Rev limiter 2 is another additional rev limiter that's only activated when that digital switch on my dash is activated. That one we set at 6,000. So in this pass that you just saw, that burnout was held right at 6,000, didn't go above. So even though my overall rev limiter was at 7, my burnout, I was able to like keep it floored, give it as much, and it's just sitting there. What would be bouncing really hard on 6,000 RPM is actually pretty soft at 6,000 RPM because of this table that we used over here. Okay, so this is the burnout rev limit. And I gotta stop saying that. Timing, I'm gonna have to think of another word for a timing retard, because I swear YouTube is not happy about me using that word because it thinks it's something else. But anyway, so this table is active when that dash switch is active, and only during that time. So the way we're normally navigating through this, it's just a timing offset table, the RPM as the x-axis. So remember, our burnout rev limiter, which also gets activated by that digital switch, is at 6,000. So right here is at 6,000. When I floor it and I'm trying to get my burnout going, there's no timing correction all the way up, 5,000 RPM when right before, pretty much right where it stands up. I think it stands up probably somewhere around like 4,500. So it kind of lags there, and then it starts building boost and it stands up really hard. Well, as it stands up, it comes into this portion of the table and timing starts being drastically reduced right in this area. So we're pulling a good amount of timing here that is increasing exhaust temperature, but it's only doing it for a very short period of time. So that's what's holding that RPM. It's taking power away from the engine as it's ramping up to 6 grand. So it has a much easier time limiting itself, whether it's from me pedaling it, letting off the throttle a little bit, or from it actually hitting the rev limiter. But it's a softer hit because you're taking away so much power from the motor. So that worked out pretty nicely. I think I'm going to continue to use that. The last 3 passes, the last 3 burnouts, well, I guess we tried a couple in the rain that didn't turn out too successful, but technically it's probably got about 5 burnouts on it. Seems to work great. It's exactly what I was looking for, so I'm going to continue to use that. Okay, so now we got the data log opened up. The first thing that we do as soon as we get the log opened, which just kind of, it helps a couple of things. One, gives you an idea of how long on the launch control you actually were. So as soon as we floor it, and TPS comes up over a certain threshold, whatever you have it set to start logging at, because mine's based on TPS. If I go over a certain TPS, it starts logging. And so you can check the time that you were on launch control, and then not have that time affect the time that you were actually on the throttle by zeroing it out. So this button up here, if you click that, you can select whatever parameter you actually want to zero this out at, and then the value that you want it to be based off of. So when we do this, it puts the 0 at the trans brake release. So now anything before the trans brake, like when you're getting on the converter and you're trying to build boost or whatever, that's a negative time. So you can see, all right, I was on it for a little bit less than 5 seconds before we actually let go of the trans brake and launch. That way, everything after you let go of the button is positive time. So just a really useful way to take a look at that. So because I don't need all of the other stuff off, after I've let off the pass, you just left click, highlight all of this, and it zooms in so that you can see all of the important stuff. All right, so a couple of things that we were testing here. One thing is a launch control table. So I used to have a table that retarded timing based on RPM. So I would have to change where that RPM, or I would have to change where that timing was taken out based on the launch RPM that I was using. So if I change my launch RPM, then I'd have to go in that table and I'd have to change the launch RPM. Instead of doing that, I started using another table. And it's a 2D table. And I just called it anti-lag 2D. And it's just a timing offset table with an x-axis of actual boost versus the y-axis of target boost. And so in here, and this is on the first one, I've actually changed these numbers. So you'll see why it didn't quite work out so nicely on the second pass. It worked out okay on this first pass, but not the greatest. Third one was probably the best. This was one of the things that we were playing with. So it's activated when the trans brake is on. So this is something that is only active when I'm trying to build boost. I'm on the trans brake. So that enables this table. And so it takes what I have in here for my boost target in the boost table. So if you come over to the boost table, you look at launch target for this 6 psi. So then if you look at that table, so if you look at 6 psi, these are the cells that it's going to be sampling from. So as boost increases along this axis, this is boost PSIG, so actual boost. This one, even though it says boost right there, it's actually target boost. I don't know why that's glitching out and not saying that. But so it's always, because my target is 6, it's always going to be going across these cells. So I get on launch control initially. As soon as I get on it, I haven't built any boost yet or anything like that. It's sampling from, right in between these two cells. So it's retarding a little bit of timing, but for the most part, I'm coming up, onto the converter with, not a whole lot of timing retard. So as that stays on launch control and starts building a little bit of boost, it navigates across these cells and starts retarding more and more timing so that it can help it build more boost. The idea of this is, and you can see this green line is boost, and so you can see boost is steadily increasing. It wasn't enough timing taken out to build the boost fast enough to where you could see it plateau, but the theory of this table, once I get these numbers correct in here for my motor and my setup, is that it'll retard enough timing to get all the way to the target. So that's why these are set up to, essentially match each other. So at 6 psi, once you get to actual 6 psi right here, it's going to want to continue to go up because you're pulling a lot of timing. What creates an an easy feedback loop is the fact that beyond that is 0 degrees. It's not going to be pulling any more timing. It's going to give that timing back. It's going to create less exhaust volume going straight to the turbo. And you're going to basically just bounce here and there, because as soon as you start giving that timing back, it's not going to be able to maintain that boost. And then, so once it stops being able to maintain that boost, it's going to fall back down. Well, when it falls back down, it's going to go back into this timing retard, take more timing out, and build the boost back up. So you're going to end up kind of just hovering right in the middle here, right at your 6 psi-ish target. So, and the way this is shaped out, as long as all of these numbers end up kind of cooperating, once I get these to what they're supposed to be at, as I change my target, I no longer have to change the amount of timing that I'm taking out. It's all done automatically in this table. So if on another road it can handle way more, I choose 11, well, it's now sampling from these cells, and so it's going to go across here. It's going to pull more timing, and then it's going to start doing the little feedback loop right here, once it gets up to 11 psi. And so hopefully maintain the boost there. So that's the theory. I mean, the similar tables we use on other ECUs, it's the same exact concept. It just looks a little bit different in this one. So I know it'll work because we do it for launch control on other cars. But I've got to get the timing retard right. It's easier in the other cars that we've done because it's been on manual cars where they are preloading, but they're not putting a crazy amount of load on it. So really you just, you're dealing with a free revving motor that doesn't have to have a whole lot of timing in it in order to operate. Whereas these cars, since you're always coupled at least somewhat, you're on the trans brake, you're trying to get through the converter. If you take away too much timing so that you can build boost, it'll actually take away too much power to where it starts falling in RPM. And you'll see that in the next pass that we did, because that's what I ended up doing. I changed a bunch of numbers in this table, and it took out too much timing, and it couldn't maintain that RPM. Luckily, that double-edged sword is when it was reducing the amount of RPM, it was also still building a decent amount of boost, and so it left okay. Better than this one, actually. Okay, so let's just go through this log and just see how kind of the pass looked. So like I said, it was relatively lazy out the hole, and you can kind of see that just by looking at the red line here is RPM. Now, it's fairly linear. I would like this to be a little bit more, I guess, convex, you could say, coming up like this, showing a little bit of wheel speed as it goes, through first gear. This is relatively linear. It means it was basically dead hooked. Now, you see a little bit of squiggles all the way through here. It tends to do that with the street. Street's a heck of a lot bumpier than the track. You are also always kind of at the threshold of traction. So there's a lot of small load changes as you go through. So you'll see more fluctuation than at the track in things like AFR and the RPM trend here. So, but the general trend of it was pretty linear. So not enough power on the leave, not enough RPM on the leave, and that was pretty obvious. But all was well. I mean, this was all very much drama free, nothing too crazy, to the point where it felt a little bit slow, and I knew I was only targeting about 19 psi. So like we said, the RPM was low, the launch boost was low, so 6 psi. So 6 psi on the launch boost, that's what I would consider low. I'm sure a lot of people would consider it very low. The launch control RPM was 3,500. That's low even for me, and I usually go pretty low. And then the peak boost that we used, we were only targeting 19 psi, and this is a relatively late ramp. So this timer starts as soon as I let go of the trans brake. This is what I would consider a pretty soft, a pretty lazy ramp, especially for a road that was doing as well as that one was. So really we weren't asking for the max amount of power until about 3 seconds out. On a really good road or at the track or something like that, we're probably doing it at 1 second out. It probably 1 to 1.5 seconds if it's a really good road will be at max boost, and then a pretty steep ramp, obviously getting there. At the track, it may be less than 1 second that we're ramping in all of the boost. And it's not so much a traction battle at that point. It's more of a wheelie battle at the track. But on a slick surface, sometimes this is what you got to do. Now, it could end up, this ramp could work on a much worse road. It would work great. Here, it was just a little bit too low because there was more available grip. It was pretty obvious. So right before the end, I went ahead and grabbed the scramble button as well. So you can see this this table right here. You watch this value changing. It's this line right here. So when I press the scramble button, right off the bat, it's at 1 psi as soon as I press the button, but then it ramps up to another. I think I only have like 2 psi in it right now, but it ramps up. So even though it's only saying 1 psi, it's actually ramping in between that whole time right there. So like 1.25, 1.5, and then it eventually gets up to 2. So if we had more, if I wanted to run more boost, or if I wanted to start at a lower boost and have the, all the way up to full boost, then you can put that on a 5 psi ramp within a second or something like that. It just, when you're already at a decent amount of boost on a turbo like this, and you grab a scramble, immediately asking for a higher target, and therefore a big duty cycle increase happens. So you may be hovering at the boost that you're supposed to be at maybe like 45%, and then you grab the scramble. Well, as soon as you grab the scramble, the computer is saying that, crap, I'm too low. I need to do something to duty cycle to get myself up to the correct target. So right away, it's going to start really flooding in the duty cycle. And, when the turbo's already going pretty good like that, and it just, closes the gate, it's going to spike up pretty quick. And so that can be a pretty abrupt increase in power, and that could cause spin itself. So we always like to put in a little bit of a ramp, even on our scramble, just to soften the load a little bit. It could be less than a second. It could be a fraction of a second. It just depends on your setup. So the way that looks is, it's another advanced table. Come over to 1D table, and it's a boost offset by time access. And you can set this to activate whatever the hell you want. I use the purge function to actually control my bump feature. So that's why this says N2O purge. That's actually my bump button. My bump button also doubles as the scramble. So whenever that button is pushed down, technically I am also scrambling. But because I only tap it just to get myself to move forward when I'm using it as the purge or bump, they can exist at the same time. I didn't go in and make sure that the tables are not being used at the same time. It didn't matter. It wasn't important enough to make that difference. It's a momentary scramble. Every time I try to bump in, it's not affecting anything. So there's no point in trying to go through the complication of associating the tables and making sure that they're independently working. So it's very simple. Basically, just as long as the TPS is above 75%, that's its secondary activation. So it has to be, my button needs to be pressed and I need to be floored all the way. And that's so that just in case my brain doesn't work right, and if I'm trying to pedal but I'm still holding down the button, then it means I need to get out of it for some reason. So if I let go of the button, that's me trying to get out of it. If I let go of the pedal and I forget to let go of the button, I still want it to stop targeting a higher boost. So either one of those happen, this table is no longer active, and this is kind of what the ramp looks like. So you can set these numbers to whatever the heck you want. You can set this to 1, so that it's, or 3. So if you want 3 immediately and you want it to ramp up to 8, on top of whatever your target is, you just put 3 here. Whatever the number is there, 8 there, and then highlight the whole table, right click, fill row values. It'll give you that nice smooth line between the two. Then you just set what your time wants to be. So basically this happens, it's 1 to 2 psi over a second and a quarter, basically. So as soon as I press it, jumps up to 1. By 1.2 seconds, it's at 2. And you can actually see the effect of the scramble right there at the very end. So if you look, actually that made it harder to see, didn't it? Okay, so there is a little bit of a delay when that works. So when you're trying to get the right boost curve, or you're trying to get an idea of what your scramble button needs to be, or when you need to activate something, you need to make sure that you understand that you are making a change to a solenoid that is making a change to how much air goes to the top or the bottom of a wastegate, which is controlling the amount of air that either goes to the turbo or goes around it. So there's a lot of extension between those two. It's much quicker if it was a solenoid that was controlling the valve that was controlling the exhaust. There would still be a lag in the change that it needs to make, because what you're trying to make a change to is boost. But you're going through multiple levels of controlling the solenoid, which is controlling the air to the wastegate, which is controlling the air to, from the engine to the turbo, to control the air that goes into the engine. So the fact that the delay is only this long, I mean, it's, a fraction of a second, but the delay does exist. So right away, it's requesting for 1 more PSI, but it takes a little while for it to make that PSI. So you just need to, kind of be aware of that. But you see it go up. It ends up doing what it's supposed to do. And that was just one thing. As we were going through the pass, I was like, well, I might as well test this and make sure everything works. So tested it. Everything was good. One more big thing to take away is we changed the injectors out before these passes. And everything went well on the dyno. And luckily, everything went pretty good on this pass as well. So let me take away a couple of things so that we can look at this a little bit better. RPM. Okay, so the stuff that we're looking at is boost is the green line. This light blue is the fuel pressure. So all is well here. As boost increased, so did fuel pressure. So it was good. I would have expected it to be a little bit more of a steep curve, similar to the boost, but it didn't go down, so I was happy. All is well there. The reason why I'm trying to keep an eye on this is because we ran out of fuel when we had the 1200cc injectors in there. And when we went to the 160s, I decided to also at the same time lower fuel pressure because I was pretty sure that we were out of injector only, but I wasn't sure if we were also at the threshold of the pump. I don't know what these MagnaFuel 4303s are supposed to be able to support, but I think we're close to what the threshold is. So I wanted to give the pump the best chance that it could, since we didn't need any more injectors, so I didn't have to increase pressure to make the injectors flow more. We had more injector. So I said, well, I'll lower the fuel pressure because the pump is going to be happier at a lower pressure. But we see later on that that we are kind of at the limit of the pump, or at least the way that I have the pump currently installed. And I'll talk. All right, the last thing that we probably want to take a look at on this is these 3-step tables. Earlier in the video, I was talking about the menus that we have to choose between the 3 different power control settings that we have. So I set up a view so that we can look at all of these. So depending on which one I select, one of these 3 are going to be active. And I'm calling it 3-step because it's similar to a 3-step that we use on manual import cars or whatever. Here is what it is. Or no, we'll use moderate. Okay. This is the table that I was using. This is the moderate 3-step table. So what it is, it's a timing offset. The x-axis is boost time. And the reason why I did that is because I was trying to figure out how to make it activate at the same time as the trans brake. So, but I also wanted to use a different activation so that I could arm it with the dash basically, but then I didn't want it to start navigating through the table until I let go of the trans brake button. But I didn't have the option to do that because I had to use this activation for the dash. And then when I came down here in advanced enable, that wasn't an option that I could choose as a secondary enable. So what I ended up doing is just making the x-axis, which would normally be just regular time, I made it boost time, which is already associated to the trans brake button. So as soon as I let go of the trans brake, boost time actually starts at that point. So it enables me to tie this table to the time scale of letting go of the trans brake button, which without actually having to use an activation of the trans brake. So that's how I arm it with the dash switch and activate it with the trans brake. And so this is all this looks like. What we're doing here is this is time. I only go over a little bit less than 2 seconds. That's all I'm really concerned about with this table, is just the initial hit. That's all I'm trying to do. Once I get to about 2 seconds, I have enough momentum to where I have a little bit more leeway with how much wheel speed I could get, and hopefully I can guess that correctly in my normal power control tables, whether that's a timing table or the boost control table itself. So, but this is the important part. It's where the truck doesn't have a whole lot of momentum yet. And so if I light the tires up right here, I'm not going to be moving anywhere. If I light them, if I'm putting too much power in there and I'm spinning after I'm already going like 80 miles an hour, I still accelerate a decent amount even when I'm spinning. But this, we're dead in the water before 2 seconds if we decide to spin entirely too much. So what this is doing is as soon as I let go of the trans brake button, time starts ticking. And obviously the same time I let go of the trans brake button, RPM starts going up. I'm engaged in first gear, I'm moving forward, RPM is going to rise. So what I've done is just, I've explained this a couple of times, but I don't know if I've explained it like right here and given a visual aid. So you'll see where we are sampling from in the log. We'll go right here. Boost time hasn't started yet at this point. So we're just sitting here in this cell. There's no timing retard that's actually sampling. Nothing is going on. And then we start moving forward in the table. After we have launched, this is 1 second out. You can see we're way down here. We're nowhere near this RPM trend. So that tells me we were, way low on power because our RPM is way down here. If we would have given it more power, if we would have, accidentally spun, this would be sampling from closer up here and it would receive a timing retard if it was too much. But we were nowhere near it. So if you come off of here, just off of the button, fraction of a second off the button. We're closer to that, but like I said, we didn't leave with enough power. We didn't get any kind of wheel speed. It basically rolled right off the line. And that's why we were nowhere near this. So that's kind of the function of that. I'll show you when it actually did work a little bit, but we stayed pretty far from this line the whole way. So I think I'm actually going to move this RPM trend down quite a bit now that I know what kind of RPM progression we can expect to see on a good hit or hot hit and a soft one. So pretty much all is well there. Everything worked as it was supposed to. So we'll take a look at the seconds. Second pass was still low RPM launch, but I tried to target much more boost on the launch. The moderate 3-step table was still being used. We turned the peak boost up to target 21 psi, and then increased the ramp a little bit as well. Burnout rev limiter was still being used in this one as well. So we'll take a look at that real quick. All right, so a good amount to go over even just right there. So remember how I was talking about earlier where if you pull out too much timing on the launch control, you can actually take away too much power. And you're sacrificing power to run the engine to build boost. And if you take away too much or your converter is too tight to where you need enough power to actually even maintain that RPM, you end up actually lowering the RPM of it and it can screw everything up. See right there. Right there, it falls off of RPM. You can hear it bouncing on the launch control, and then suddenly it just goes consistent RPM. So we'll actually look at that in the log. It was actually a pretty decent leave considering the RPM was not what we were actually trying to target. It wasn't very far off, so luckily that did okay. And it did leave with more boost, so that was good. The ramp was, it was a little bit spicy, but it managed to get some wheel speed. You'll see in this shot from behind, you can actually see the tire marks being left. It's a little bit dark when it actually does it, but you can see when it comes into light that it's leaving them, and then when I let out, they stop. So it was enough wheel speed to put down some rubber up top, but it was manageable. The truck went straight. It was not slowing down. It wasn't doing a burnout. It wasn't spinning so much that I wasn't accelerating anymore. It felt really good. Like power progression on this was probably just right. It was on the money for that road. So yeah, keep an eye on the tire marks as this is going. You can see them when it goes to the first light, it's leaving black lines, and then it gets dark and I let out and you see it's not leaving them anymore. So it was a little hot, but I think it was just right. I would have been okay with that. I would have stayed in it if it was actually racing against someone. So yeah, pretty good. Decent 60, decent times all around considering we let out early. It did pretty good. So we'll take a look at the log right there. There's a couple of things that happened. We'll open the calibration for the second pass. Where are we at here? The ranch. I don't know what that place is actually called, but I call it the ranch. All right, so that was one. So we'll open up test 2. Then we'll open up the other log. Oh, I guess I call it ranch on the tune, but then farm on the... Okay, so we'll look at that later. That's some fun stuff. All right, so same sort of thing right off the bat. Zero it out. Tell it yes. All right, now I got my 0 right at trans brake release, and that's the first thing I'll take a look at. So remember in the video how you heard it bouncing off the limiter. That's here. RPM's going up and down. It's bouncing. And then as soon as it gets to about here, it just goes smooth. RPM actually dips a little bit. So it was going between, it was bouncing right there at, I think we set it to 36 or something like that. So it's bouncing at 36, and then it just gets bogged down, goes all the way down to about 35.50, 35.30, somewhere around. So not terribly off the target that we were looking at. The target was 36, I believe. But the reason why this happened is if you look at what ignition timing is doing, that table that we were using, see how timing just drastically dropped off. So as boost was coming up, this green line here, that table that we'll take a look at in a second started really chopping away the timing. If you look at ignition timing over here, it's at 8.5 degrees right now. Sorry, 13 there, and then as it comes down, 8 degrees, starts dropping more and more and more. 3 degrees, 2 degrees, but I mean by this point the engine is struggling a decent amount to keep that RPM up. I did not need to take out that much timing yet. I should have taken it out slower. So the higher boost we have, the more timing I'm able to take out, because the higher boost is giving the engine the ability to make more power. So I can take away more timing to send to the turbo to make even more boost. So it's a balancing act. If you take away the timing, before you even make any boost, chances are the engine's not even going to make it to launch control. So if I just go straight to 1 degree of timing right as soon as I floor it, it'll never work. It's not going to build any boost. It's not even going to make it to the rev limiter. So this was an overshoot. I wanted to take out more timing so that it would build boost quicker, and it kind of shot me in the foot. I wasn't able to get enough RPM to still build a boost. So it made just under 8 PSI, but as you can see, that just didn't work out. So I had to make a change to that. Target was 8 PSI, so it did a decent job doing that, but yeah, it didn't quite get there. If the one thing that you'll notice is the boost control solenoid duty cycle went way down because it was close to the target, so it was starting to trim away what it was using. Those are the two things that are going to help you build boost. Well, one of the two things, two of the things that will help you build boost is your duty cycle percentage. So the further you are away from the target, the higher this duty cycle percentage is going to be if you're using feedback. And then the RPM, the higher the RPM, the easier it is to make the boost. The problem is the higher the RPM, the more chance you have of shocking the tire and starting to spin. And then the other thing is playing with timing. The less timing that you can use, the more of that exhaust is going to be sent to the turbo to help spool that up. So timing, boost control solenoid, and RPM. Those are kind of the two things, or the three things that you have to use. Another fun thing, right after the button, we let go right here. So at this point, I'm like, well, I don't even know if it's going to launch very good because obviously it's pulling down in RPM too much. Don't know if it made enough boost. Well, it did, because remember how on the previous run that we did, this RPM trend, see how it's concave right here, right off the bat? It jumps up more than it's moving forward. That's kind of what we were looking for. We wanted that to continue a little bit longer, but it shows that we left with, a good amount more power. And so this shot up and, then actually grabbed down and then went up linear. So we got a tiny bit of wheel speed and then it grabbed and started continuing on. Now, this curve is also affected by what the converter is doing, but for the most part, the way we're looking at this is it was much better. The last one was linear right off the button, just basically lugged its way all the way up. This one we hit it with some more, and it responded better. It then gripped, pretty docile all the way up through first gear, and then this is where the boost actually started pouring in. So the boost curve that we used was a little bit more abrupt on this one. So we left with more. We targeted 8 psi. We were able to basically almost get to 8 psi. And then I actually made a mistake here. This was supposed to, your first values are always supposed to be whatever you're targeting. So these should have been 8 psi. So that accounts for this little dip right here. So boost came up, and I let go of the button, and it goes down briefly, and then it starts coming back up. That was because I made my target less than what I was, or made my first initial boost curve target less than what my launch control target was. So if you were to overlay the two, you would see this boost coming up a lot more abruptly. At this point, we're still full boost at around 3 seconds or so, but that full boost is now 22 pounds instead of 19 pounds. So basically over here is where originally full boost was for the first pass. So we reached it a little bit more than half a second earlier, and then we continued to increase. So it was a pretty healthy ramp. It could have used a little bit more in first gear, but then that would have affected how we came in through this area as well. So here is the boost curve. It looks extremely similar to the boost curve that we asked for, and it definitely got pretty naughty up here, basically. So you'll see this. I didn't stay in second gear very long because I was concerned with it climbing in RPM and getting out of hand a little bit. So I went into third early to try to settle it down. Because one of the things that you end up doing is shifting early to try to mitigate any kind of spin. So I felt it stand up, and it was very abrupt once the boost came in. I was like, crap, that's a little bit of spin. Let me see if I can calm it down. And so I ended up shifting into third, and you'll see this RPM almost kind of just like hover there, like at 6,400 or so, because it was basically the car catching up with itself. There was wheel speed. You see it in the video actually leaving black marks. That was okay. That was manageable. At some point, this RPM would eventually catch up. So once the truck starts catching up with the wheel speed, you will see this line, instead of staying leveled out, it'll start coming up again. So right here, I'm basically just at this RPM too early for the truck because there's wheel speed going on. So it's spinning, spinning, spinning. If I would have stayed in it long enough, it would have eventually come down a little bit and then started coming back up as it gripped and then continued through. But yeah, I mean, all through this, the converter is doing its job. Now, here comes the shitty part, is this line right here, this light purple line, basically shows that we have an issue. It could be a lot worse, but we do have an issue. So this is fuel pressure, this little guy. And everything was going swell as it went up through the boost. Fuel pressure was increasing, 59 pounds, 60 pounds, and then once we get beyond what we had originally done, we start seeing a fuel pressure drop. So now we're in the 23 pounds, just under 24 pounds basically. Yeah, right around 23.7. You'll see the boost over here, 23.7. When we were on the dyno, the most we ever did was 22.7. So I didn't actually get to see this, and I'm not sure I would have seen it on the dyno being such a quick pull. But here it's very obvious. Fuel pressure came all the way down. So we had about a 9 psi drop in fuel pressure. Luckily, as cool as Holley is, closed loop was able to keep air fuel ratio just right, but the injector duty cycle was quite a bit higher than it needed to be. I mean, so we basically go from an injector duty cycle of, let's see, 63%, 57%, somewhere around there. And then once fuel pressure starts dropping, then you get this false increase of duty cycle because the injectors are having to open more to compensate for the lack of fuel pressure. And so, but that is what saved us. I mean, that's what saves this, or that's what in this system saves this motor, is that whether you're doing this based off of a table that compensates from fuel pressure to immediately add duty cycle, or you're just letting closed loop play God, basic, that saved it. So we end at 81% duty cycle. 81% duty cycle on these injectors is what it took to maintain fuel at only 51 psi of fuel pressure. If fuel pressure continued to rise like it was supposed to, and we were at more like 65%, 65 psi, then that duty cycle would be drastically lower, probably 20% lower or something like that. We should be in the range of 65, 66% or something like that. So that's just I need to make. That's one of the things. That's why you always look at your logs so that you can see things like this. Now I know that if I want to stay safe until we fix this problem, I cannot do any more than about 22 pounds. That's what I know will be safe all the way through the pull. If I want to get greedy with it, this is going to happen. Now I can still get greedy with it because let's be honest, it did maintain air fuel. It had enough injector duty cycle to stay under 100% and maintain fuel at 51 psi. It's a giant red flag that I do not have enough pump or something is wrong in my pump and line system, which I have already kind of figured out. So I'll change that. I'm not sure that we'll get a crazy amount more fuel out of it. Realistically, we may be just maxing out this pump. It's a MagnaFuel 4303. We make about 1,060 at 22.7 pounds. This was another PSI. It's probably 1120, 1130 horsepower or something like that at that point. It might just be at a pump. I'm not sure what a 4303 is supposed to do on the 85. I've seen drastically different numbers that people have spouted out. Some people say, oh, they can only do 1,000 on pump gas, and on E85 it's way less. I mean, that's horseshit because we've already made way more than that. So I don't know what the actual limit is. I thought it was somewhere around 1,300. We will find out. But I want to make sure before I start thinking about getting a different pump or adding a secondary pump, I want to make sure that this one is both wired and plumbed correctly. We fixed the wiring issue a long time ago. Now apparently it's time to fix the plumbing issue. The other thing it could be is the fuel filter got a little bit clogged up. So we'll see. We'll check both of those things and show it in another video. Okay, so look at these settings real quick. The RPM that we ended up using to launch, so the previous one was, what was it, 3,500 or something like that. The RPM that we used for this one was 3,600, so a little bit higher than the previous one. A lot higher than we normally run. Honestly, on a crappy road, we may be launching all the way down to like 3,300 or 3,200 even. 3,600 is quite a bit taller, but because this converter is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, we're feeling the fact that our gear is a little bit taller than we're used to. We originally were on 355s with that slipping converter. Everything felt a lot shorter. So still getting used to this, but these were decent passes. The first decent passes that we could get a lot of good data from. Boost target was 8, like we said before. And let me show you what was happening when it was pulling us down on the launch control. So if you'll look at this area here is right when kind of problems started happening. It was pulling so much timing. So here's where we're sampling from in the table because our target is 8 psi. And as you go across here, it's retarding by this point 13 degrees. It's going to continue on 16 degrees, 19 degrees, 20 degrees. Well, the area that we're sampling from at this point, we were already, ignition timing was at 13 degrees with that timing being pulled. So the overall timing where we were at is, I mean, you're talking, 25 degrees or somewhere around there, assuming that no other variables are in play. So if you were to actually get to the end of that row, which we almost did, negative 20-ish, yeah, you end up being almost at 0 degrees. So that, well, and keep in mind, as boost is going up, we're traveling through that timing table. We're going up in that timing table, which is retarding the timing. So we're at negative 20 degrees on this. It's trying to pull 20 degrees out of it, and we're already making about 8 psi. So then the value that it's pulling from is right around here. So about 21 degrees, probably somewhere around there. And that is why the result of that ended up being about 1 degree. So that makes complete sense. We just overshot it a little bit. So I ended up making edits to that table to take out less timing, as abrupt as that. But it did do its job. I mean, it was only slightly off. I ended up going back and putting a little bit too much timing back in. What I'll probably do is take this table and just take away a little bit less. I think I overshot and ended up putting a little bit too much back into it, but we'll take a look at that on the next one. All right, now the cool table that gets me excited is the 3-step medium table. That's the one that was selected. And so here's where we're sampling from when we are still on launch control. So we're looking at these, you have all 3 of these 3-step tables right here. And so you'll see it actually made some changes here. That's this table, the moderate street. And so if you scroll through, this is what it looks like when you actually see something. So you can see in the moderate street over here, it's actually making some changes. That's what that's going to look like when it's actually working. It's barely making any change, don't get me wrong. We, once again, just did not hit it hard enough in the beginning. We really have to get our heads around the gearing that we're using in this converter. I'm not used to having to hit it so hard. It's a good problem to have, but I need to get these safety nets in place so that when I do, if I overshoot it, it's going to come right in there. Right off the button, right here, you can see, I mean, we're close to this cell. Remember, Holley interpolates between all of these cells. So if you're between 30 and -2, depending on which cell you're closer to, it's going to be averaging based on that. So even though these are big blocks, they have actually really smooth timing changes, because as you get closer to a cell, it's going to be averaging between the cells that are around it. So that's why right as we let go of the button, we got enough RPM and therefore wheel speed to be close to the threshold that we set in place as, good or bad RPM trend. So see, we start clipping this one a little bit, and so it starts averaging between 0 and -2, which yielded a very small timing change. We probably really didn't get, wheel speed probably didn't get slowed down much by this at all, if at all. So still kind of just clipping this here and there as it goes up through until you see RPM start leveling out and we start falling away, because that trend that we have on that table is very linear. That's how our old converter used to look. Now, if we're going to continue to get this little RPM trend that comes up and then plateaus and then continues to go up, if that's how this converter is going to look, then we need to change this to expect that. Because what we don't want to do is, see how we're so far away from this RPM threshold. If the converter is still grabbing really hard and it's enabling a lot of wheel speed at this same point, then this table is missing, it's missing its purpose. It needs to trace what a perfect RPM trend is. So if a perfect RPM trend for the street, a moderate street, has to have a timing retard that comes down here a little bit and then continues to go up, that's what we're going to eventually shape this table to look like. And that's going to be our ideal RPM trend for this setup and this converter. all that changes as soon as you change anything. But yeah, so you'll see, you saw the table made a little bit of a change, but then it started falling away from that line, and it's on its own now. There's no timing changes down here at all. It's just completely going off of the power curve that it had. And so once it ramped up, I mean, we're still, start ramping into boost a decent amount right here, but by that time we're already kind of out of this table's capability. We're almost to the end. So even if we were all the way up here, we'd be pretty close to the end. And making it all on its own. So what we're going to try to do from here on out is hit it hard enough to where we really lean on this table, to where we're forced to just sit here and ride this line, and then we can come off of it a little bit later. But we got to test and make that line just right. All right, so now we'll take a look at the third pass. And quite a few things, a couple of things were turned up. This was supposed to be pretty hot. I wish we would have gone a little bit hotter on the launch RPM and the launch boost, but we definitely went a little bit too hot on the ramp, as you'll see here. All right, so you'll see let out of it even earlier than the other passes. It's just not worth it to try to steer it and keep it out of the other lane for not even a race. The tested what it was supposed to. It was a little bit too much power, a little bit too early. It gave a little bit too much wheel speed, so we let out. Seems like it sounds a little bit lazy out the gate, but the 60 was actually pretty decent. It was pretty good for what it is. I think we can do a little bit better, and then we have that table there as a safety net. I think just once it started actually rolling out of first gear, we need to bring that safety net RPM down a little bit, because obviously our trend for being kind of close to the threshold of traction is much lower than what we have in that table right now. So we'll edit that. That's going to take some getting used to and a couple more passes to get right, but it worked decent on this. This was not a slow pass on the way out. It was just the progression was too early, but that's what we wanted to see. The progression was pretty good. It was right at the threshold of the tires on the second pass, to where it was leaving some marks down there. But I wanted to see if we could actually put a little bit more in it earlier, so that part where it was spinning would be a little bit less of a hassle, because we'd have more pace by the time it got there. But what it ended up doing is just lighting them earlier, to the point where we didn't have enough momentum, and it caused even more spin. So not the best. A little bit earlier would be perfect. All right, so let's take a look at the calibration for that pass. All right, so this RPM was 3,700. That was the launch RPM. The boost target was 10 PSI. We unfortunately did not make it anywhere close to that, but you'll see on this boost curve, everything was sooner, and it was still up at that boost that we didn't realize at the time that we did not have fuel pump for. But this is how it's supposed to be. Your launch target should be your first values in your boost curve so that it makes that smooth transition through there. Now, the amount of timing that we took out for making boost on the launch control, I gave it back a little bit too much. So you'll see previously here it would have been at, pulling almost 20 degrees or something by this point. I got a little worried about the fact that we pulled too much timing and it brought the RPM down. I went a little bit too far in the opposite direction. So I need to make this table kind of a combination of the two. I don't need to go as drastic as the other table went, but I definitely need to pull more timing than this one did because it did struggle to make the boost, as you can see here. If duty cycle would have jumped up a little bit further, we probably would have been able to make it there, but because it got close to what the target was supposed to be in a reasonable amount of time, duty cycle didn't climb up very fast, so it didn't help it. So really, I want to be able to make this off of just timing alone and not have to rely on the boost control duty cycle to jack up real high, because that tends to screw things up once you let go of the button. If that duty cycle is really high because it was trying to reach your launch control boost, then it's going to take a while for that to chop away, and so you might end up with a boost spike early in your run by accident. So I like it like this. We just need to get that timing table correct. So, but it was leaving at another 100 RPM, so it did leave a little bit better, but not much. Not a whole lot better than the second pass. The second pass and the third pass were basically the same 60. And we're using the Draggy. I don't know if you guys have ever used Draggy before, but it's insanely accurate. It's within hundredths of your time whenever we've compared it to the track. So we do trust the times on the street. They are a huge help in trying to get actual data from these tests. It's great. So let's see, this one is already zeroed out, so we'll just go ahead and highlight it. And so you'll see a similar hump on the way out. RPM did go up and then taper off, but if you see how target boost ramped up a heck of a lot earlier, so you have less of a plateau and it just continued on up. Problem is it was spinning a decent amount on its ramp up here. Spinning a little bit at the top of first, and then when I shifted, it just kind of carried the spin into second gear. Didn't seem like it was going to come around. Started going toward the center, so I went into third, and then I let out. That table, because it was within 2 seconds, that table should have caught this spin on the way up. But what I'll be guessing is that it didn't get very close, because our RPM trend in that table is still not what we need. So if you look here, we're closer to the line, but still not close enough to make a difference, even though we know we were spinning a little bit at this point. Our pattern in that table just isn't right, obviously. So see, we're way far away from it over here. I think we were spinning at about this point. We'll call it right there. And see, we're still well below that. If I were to be on the slow table, I would still be too far away from that. Moderate table, yep, still far away from that. So I've got to change these to match what we know now from this data. And, that's why we test, so that we can figure out what an ideal RPM trend is supposed to be. So we shot well under the RPM trend, and we saw what that looked like, and then we picked it up to right here where we should have been above the RPM trend, and it was still too far away. So we'll fix that. That way it'll step in next time, and hopefully it'll help not carry that, that ramp of spin that was happening. Hopefully it won't carry it into the next gear. And you'll see right here, fuel pressure started diving off, but we let out of the pass early, so it wasn't a huge deal. But yeah, right at pretty much the same boost, anything right around 22 psi, fuel pressure starts dropping, duty cycle on the injector starts coming up, and but it survived, so that's good. And I'll probably continue to do that. looking at these tables over here, this was, let's see, it'll show us right here. Yeah, fast 3-step. So right off the launch, it made a tiny little change, but barely any. It really wasn't much of a change. And then when we needed it to make a change up here, like we showed you, it was already well below the RPM trend. So I think that's our biggest takeaway from this. That's the most important thing that I need to edit is I got to get this RPM trend correct and at the right levels of, you know, a slow road, a medium road, and a fast road, so that I can be a little bit more confident at hitting it with a lot of power and knowing that it'll just ride that line and be a decent pass. All right, so that's basically it for this. Hopefully some of you guys made it all the way through this video. I know it's a little bit rough, a little bit dry when you're just looking at logs, looking at tunes, and only a little bit of actual drag racing video in there. But, you know, this is what we do when we go out and make a pass. We gotta come analyze the data. So I think what we're going to make some changes to are the 3-step tables for sure. We're going to make sure that that RPM trend is correct. And the other thing is probably take a mixture between the launch parameters that we used for the second pass, as far as boost curve for the second pass was probably ideal. I like the idea of leaving at about 10 pounds, but we got to change that anti-lag table to be able to actually get to 10 pounds using the timing. So that's going to be a mixture between the anti-lag table from the second pass and the anti-lag table from the third pass, because one was a little bit too steep, the other one was not heavy enough. So we'll combine those two to get something right in the middle that should work well, and then same goes for the boost curve. I liked the abruptness of the boost curve in the second pass, and maybe make it a little bit less abrupt and just fill the gap with the scramble button. But if we're leaving at a higher boost and we use that progression that comes in pretty soon, I think that'll be perfect. The third one was just a little bit too abrupt, and so it showed that with spin. I think I would have driven that out if it was a race against somebody, but it was the fastest. It was not the fastest 60 actually. The second pass had a better 60 than the third one did. But the third one, the amount of power that we put in there, if I could have wrangled it in, it was performing better up top, or I should say midway through the run, because that's as far as we got. But if you can't keep it straight, then it doesn't matter how fast you're going. So, you know, not sure if I would have been able to stay all the way in it, but I definitely would have tried. Since it's testing, you know, I don't want to kill myself just for that. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. A lot of the tables that we went over, they're pretty basic tables, but if you guys have any questions about them, by all means, leave them in the comments. Let me know if you want more of these kinds of things. Anytime we go out testing, I always have some logs to look over. So if this is something that you want to see, or see me test something specific, maybe there's something that you do that you think I should give a try, let me know, and you know, maybe I'll give it a try, and then I'll do another stream like this to kind of show how it worked out and what we saw from it. On that note, yeah, make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe if you're not already, turn on notifications, you know, the whole thing. And I'll leave you with probably what was the best pass of the night. I think Chris was actually doing better that night than I was. So we'll see you next time. Turn the GoPro on.
That was good.
Damn it. I knew I should have turned it on when you said.
I feel like Patella.